Welcome to Downshift. My name is Matt, and for the last week I have been driving around in Mazda's new CX50 hybrid, and it's pretty good. But over here to my left we have my wife and I's Honda CRV hybrid. We've had this for the last 2 months, and it's also very good. The truth is, I think these two cars next to me are the best in the segment. And today I'm going to walk you through how they compare the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's get into the CRV hybrid versus the CX50 hybrid. Now, like I mentioned, I've spent a good amount of time with both of these cars now, so I know them pretty well. Now, the first thing that we're going to start with is engines, under the hood, powertrains really, because it's more than just an engine for both of them. Obviously, the CX50, this is the first time that we've had a hybrid for the CX50. It's actually the same engine under the hood of a RAV4 hybrid. So it's Toyota's, even though it has a Mazda cover on it, it's Toyota's 2.5 naturally aspirated 4-cylinder with the hybrid component. And here, according to the EPA, in the CX50, you're supposed to get about 38 mpg out of this thing. Now again, being the hybrid, that's probably more what you're looking for. That said, we did do our Lakeshore Loop fuel economy test. It's a 35-mile course, 15 miles of country roads, 10 miles of highway, 10 miles of city. It was about 45 degrees that day that we did it, and it came back with 42.8 mpg. I mean, that is fantastic. Really, really impressive fuel economy. And, you know, it's only going to get a little bit better as you approach the 60-degree mark. That's kind of the optimal temperature for hybrids to work. 0 to 60 is done in like 7.3 seconds. This has 219 horsepower and somewhere around 200 pound-feet of torque. I think it's like 163 from the actual engine, and then the electrics make the number a little bit squishy. The Honda, on the other hand, is a bit different. This is Honda's 2-motor hybrid system, so it's a 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine here, and it's their 2-motor hybrid system. But in an oversimplified way, you can kind of think of it as sort of like an EV that's fed not by a battery, but kind of by the engine. So the engine feeds power to the electric motors, and the electric motors are actually the thing that drives the car. Now, there is a possibility, obviously, in certain conditions and certain speeds, where the engine will actually physically link up to the wheels, but I don't want to overcomplicate it for this video. It's about 204-ish horsepower, 247, though, pound-feet of torque. So it's got significantly more torque in the Honda than in the Mazda. You would think would mean 0 to 60 is good for a little bit quicker, but it's actually about 7.8, so about half a second slower to 60 in the CRV. The thing though, with Honda's hybrid system, with this 2-motor system, is you're rated for front-wheel drive to get about 40 mpg combined. With all-wheel drive, it drops it down to about 37. In real-world testing, with our Lakeshore Loop, we did about 36.3. So 36.3 in the Honda, 42.8 in the Mazda. Maybe if it was warmer conditions, since this is more of an electrical system, those are more susceptible to volatility and temperature. Maybe if it was warmer, the Honda system would do better. Again, we'll do a 6-month update, since this is me and my wife's car, on how the fuel economy is improved as we get into the summer months. But that's the big delta here. Another thing to note with the Honda, on the side streets, just kind of bopping around to the shops through the suburbs in the city, you're going to get great fuel economy. 40s, low 40 mpg. That's really, really good. The problem is my wife takes this thing up to work, and it's about 50 miles to work, thereabouts. And it's just open highway. So this thing is, the cruise is locked in at 75 miles an hour, and at least in December and January, this has been getting like 25 mpg throughout its first 2 months of life. That's including the 40 miles to the gallon trips that you're going to get in this thing around town. So it really starts to suck down fuel at open highway, high speeds like 75, especially as you crest into like 80 miles an hour. This thing is just going to suck down fuel. Again, maybe that fuel economy improves as the temperatures start to increase, but here in the winter in Wisconsin, on the open highway, this is really, really disappointing from a fuel economy perspective. And I was surprised by just how much the Mazda outperformed the Honda with fuel economy. Now, again, the Mazda is also a little bit quicker, so I kind of have to give the powertrain thing to the Mazda. Now, that being said, Honda's 2-motor system here, again, we won't go into too much detail, but there's less moving parts, so in theory, this should be more reliable, more long-term. But this being a Toyota unit, it's also going to be pretty reliable. So I might lean towards the Mazda in terms of powertrain. And then when it comes to drive wheels or the drivetrain, now the CX50 can only be had as all-wheel drive. This is kind of the Mazda staple. All of their SUVs, CUVs come standard with all-wheel drive, so you love to see that from Mazda. The Honda, on the other hand, can be had as standard with front-wheel drive. That's where you're going to get that EPA rating of 40 mpg average. Again, your mileage may vary depending on how much open highway you're doing. But we've got all-wheel drive here, so you can get all-wheel drive in your Honda. It's going to hurt your fuel economy a little bit, especially if you have a lot of open highway stuff that you're doing. I hate to keep kind of harping on that, but it's true. So you can have all-wheel drive in the Honda, whereas you will have all-wheel drive in the Mazda, no matter how much money you spend. But then as we switch gears and talk about some things like the driving experience, this is where I was a little bit, I don't want to say surprised, but I was kind of fascinated by what feedback I was feeling through the cars as I drove both of these. Now the Mazda has kind of built its reputation on like Mazda speed, being driver focused and that sort of thing. And I do think this drives pretty well. I really like the steering. It's got kind of a nice heft to it. It's not as heavy as like a BMW, but it's not as light as like a Toyota or a Hyundai. So you do feel a little bit more engaged. You have to be a little bit more into the driving with the steering. Also the braking, I think, feels really nice and organic in the Mazda. It's a nice progressive pedal. It's got a little bit of resistance. So I do notice the car driving a little bit better. I think the chassis holds on in a corner through like spirited driving a little bit better than either the Honda or the Toyota or the Tucson or the Sportage or even the Forester. So the downside to that in the Mazda though is I will go so far as to say overdamped. It's a bit stiff. It is noticeably more stiff than my Toyota RAV4 XSE. That's the XSE, that's the sporty one with the retuned kind of sporty dampers, and the Honda I think is even more comfortable than my Toyota. So the Mazda is then about 2 magnitudes more stiff than the Honda. So if you're like me and you live in the Midwest where the roads aren't perfect, this is going to jounce you around a bit more. The ride is going to be a little bit more busy. There are pros and cons to the behind the wheel experience in the Mazda. I will say though, I am really, really impressed with the Honda driving experience. Steering is really nice and organic. The brake pedal is still pretty good, but this drives really, really well. There is a little bit more body roll in a corner due to the less compression and rebound than you're getting in the Mazda. It's a little bit more wallowy, but it's also worlds more comfortable. It's also really, really, really refined. This was the big thing between these two cars behind the wheel. The hybrid system is kind of working through the engine and the transmission, whereas this is the engine's kind of just feeding power into the electric motors. So whether the engine's on or not, you're not really getting a torque kick. So if this is riding around in EV mode and then the engine needs to turn on to send more power, there's not an interruption or a quick uptick in torque. You don't feel any of that like jerkiness. It's not like this is jerky or uncomfortable. It's just I notice a little bit more of a torque kick when the engine comes on in the Mazda. It's the same thing with the Toyota RAV4. This Honda system with their 2-motor hybrid system is easily the most refined. It's the smoothest, it's the quietest, it's the most civilized kind of behind the wheel experience. This is still good, but this is great. And then when it comes to styling, this is again where Mazda generally shines. Their Kodo design language, Mazda does a fantastic job of looking sleek, elegant, and expensive. Looking a little bit more closer to that luxury tier than a mainstream tier. And I think the CX50 generally does that. The thing that lets it down though is the huge, enormous amount of black wheel cladding. I get that this is supposed to be the more like off-road oriented version of a CX5, and so you've got rear suspension that reflects that, and you've got the black plastic cladding around the entire car to give it a more kind of like off-road or kind of rugged feel. But it also, in my opinion, and again, styling is subjective, but in my opinion, it cheapens the look of this car. This is a fantastic looking car, and it would look even better if you just had normal wheel arches that were body colored. The Honda, I think, is really, really, really handsome. There's not a huge amount going on. You do kind of have to get the hybrid to get the best looking one, in my opinion. But with this Canyon Blue River metallic paint or whatever it's called, with the black accents from the hybrid, the silver tusks up front, but the classy LEDs up, I just really, really like the look of this CRV. I see them on the road all the time, and they always look really good in pretty much every color. So, hot take, I think the Honda looks better. But then let's refocus on more practical measures. Let's talk about things like cargo capacity. Now, the Honda's trunk is basically the biggest in the segment, or just thereabouts. It's about 6 cubic feet larger than the one in the CX50. Now, the CX50 isn't small or impractical, but the thing is, when you drop the rear seats in the CX50, well, the issue kind of compounds. Seats down in both of them, the Honda's trunk is then 20 cubic feet bigger. With the seats down in the Honda, it's the biggest in the class. So you're fighting against kind of Goliath here in terms of trunk volume, and it is enormous, the trunk on this Honda. It just kind of magically swallows things up. I don't really know how it does it, but it's not like the trunk in the CX50 is small. You do lose about 2 cubic feet of space in the CX50 with the hybrid system, but again, it's not tiny, and I actually do like the versatility that you get in the CX50. You get grocery bag hangers, you can actually drop the seats from the trunk with little levers on the side of the trunk wall. That's not something that you can take for granted in things like the Toyota, the Honda, the Hyundai, etc. So I like that feature, and I also like the fact that you can get a spare tire in the CX50. You're not getting a spare tire in the Honda, so there are things to like about the cargo practicality in the CX50, even though it's not quite as big, especially with the rear seats down, as the Honda. I recognize at this point that this video is starting to sound a little bit like a Mazda hit piece, but when we talk about towing, the Mazda can tow 500 more pounds than the Honda, 1,500 pounds in the CX50. But then moving up the car into the rear seats, the Mazda's rear seat is decent. Now, I'm 6'1", and I have an inch or two of knee room in front of me. I have more knee room in the CX50 than I would in the CX5, and that's kind of been the nice thing about the CX50 versus the CX5. The thing about the CX50, though, with hybrid, is that the battery lives under the seat. So there's a little bit less headroom. Like, I'm, again, 6'1", I'm not disproportionately torso heavy or torso long, however you would describe that, but I have a surprisingly little amount of headroom in the back seat of the CX50. And I have more headroom in a CX50 that's not a hybrid. So adding that battery pack, you can't recline the seats in the back, and you do lose some headroom in the CX50. But you get nice things. The doors open 90 degrees. You don't have shades for the doors, the rear seats in either of these cars. But you do have some vents and some chargers back there. You're not gonna get heated rear seats, and you're not gonna get a climate zone, but you will get climate vents in the back of the CX50. And in the Honda, it's actually pretty similar in terms of feature content. It is noticeably bigger. I have a little bit more knee room, and I have a lot more headroom in the back of the CRV. The doors still also open 90 degrees, so it's easier to load stuff or, babies or small children and get them loaded up into the car. You're also not going to get a panoramic roof on the CRV where you will in the CX50. You also don't get heated rear seats in the CRV like you don't get in the CX50. You don't get a climate zone, but you get climate vents, so it's pretty similar in the CRV, aside from not having a panoramic roof and having a little bit more space. And it might be worth noting that they're black interiors. This is the only color interior that you can get with this blue Canyon River metallic paint or whatever. If you get different colors, you can get a lighter interior, but in the Honda, you only have black as the option with this exterior paint color, but you do get some orange contrast stitching to kind of give it a little bit more personality and liven things up. In the Mazda, again, black interior, but that kind of caramel cross stitching looks really, really good. And there's a train that's gonna go right through my shot. But then moving up even further in the cabin to talk about the front seats and kind of the overall kind of cabin experience. Now, generally, again, with the exterior styling, Mazda usually brings the nicest interior in the game. And I think if you just look at it on paper, they still do. The dash, for example, is leather wrapped in kind of that caramel cross stitch, but it's also padded and like pretty squishy padded. So it gives it that sense of like, they've gone the extra mile, and generally things are not piano black. They are soft touch. They're pretty nice to look at. It's a more modern and clean and almost minimal cabin design in the CX50 without losing physical tactility of buttons. You still have buttons for your HVAC and climate controls, heated and cooled seats and that sort of thing. But then you get into the Honda, and it's not like it's bad. I think the leathers on the seats are still probably just about as nice as in the Mazda, but the dash isn't leather wrapped. You also don't get cooled seats in the Honda, whereas you do in the CX50. Hello, train. That's so loud. Jesus Christ. The man is going 3 miles. This is so loud. Why, dude? You've already honked at that side. But the fact is, despite missing like a leather wrap dash and no cooled seat in the there's something like intangible going on in the Honda, something like kind of subconscious, maybe with the ergonomics or things that you just kind of interact with, but I like it. And there's things that I don't necessarily love about the CX50. Now, generally speaking, everything on paper is probably nicer. The leathers are nicer. There's more leather in more places in the Mazda, but there's things like the cup holders that they've kind of like, they've put in front of the shifter, and it almost, if you have a tall water bottle, your bottle is gonna rest up against your heated or cooled seat control, so you might accidentally turn those on, or if you actually do wanna turn them on, then it might be a little bit more difficult. It's a nitpick, but it's something that actually and genuinely, I'm not kidding, kind of turned my wife off from the CX50. She had a CX5. We traded in a CX5 to get this CRV, and we knew that this was out, and she looked at where the cup holders were, and she has a big water bottle, and she's like, nope. And like, for some people, it's gonna be that close, because these are both great cars, so if it's just a matter of I can bring my favorite water bottle with me or I can't, sometimes it's that simple. And then we'll talk about technology. Now, technology generally is led in this class in most of the mainstream segment by Hyundai, Kia, and Toyota. They generally pack their stuff to the brim with all of the latest stuff. Mazda and Honda, however, are generally, I don't like to use the term laggards because that has a negative connotation, but they're generally more towards the back of the class. So I'm just going to read from the list of the stuff that the Mazda has. The Mazda has a head-up display. CRV does not. The Mazda does not have a 360 camera, and the rear view camera is a little not my favorite, which is odd because I think you can get a 360 camera in a CX5 and in a CX50 that isn't the hybrid. So I'm wondering, like Toyota in the RAV4 hybrid, you can get a 360 camera. So I'm wondering if in somewhere in their product planning meetings, because Mazda bought a lot of stuff from Toyota to make this car happen, I wonder if Toyota was like, we're gonna keep the 360 camera for us. You can have a reverse camera. It's not that bad. It's fine, but in the Honda, you also don't have a 360 camera. So a little bit odd that you can't get it in the hybrid version of the CX50, but you can get it in like the turbo version. But either way, they're apples to apples. Neither of them comes with a 360 camera. You're not gonna get a digital rear view mirror for either of them. It's not something that I personally would miss if I owned it, but I know some people, you know, if you're transporting larger passengers in the back and their heads get in the way of your rear view mirror, or if you're constantly driving with, you know, things packed up to the roof in your trunk, then maybe you would want a digital rear view mirror. Can't get it in either of these, but you could in the Toyota and I believe the Hyundai as well. You also have a semi-digital instrument cluster for both of these. Again, that's not competitive with what Kia, Hyundai, and Toyota is bringing, but they work pretty well. You've got a 10.25-inch screen in the Mazda versus a 9-inch screen in the Honda. Now, the Honda screen is a little bit closer to you, and it's all touchscreen all the time. There's no little dial here in the center console, versus in the Mazda, it's no touchscreen if you're using the native system. It's just using the little scroll wheel off to your right in the center console. But if you go into Apple CarPlay, then it is touchscreen. The thing that I will say about the CX50 screen is it's a little bit further away. It's better integrated into the dash. I know some people like that, so it looks a little bit more thought out rather than like an iPad slapped on. I get that comment a lot. So this is a little bit more integrated, but it's further away, so especially if you're reaching for the far side of the screen, it might be a little bit harder to get there versus operating the touchscreen in the Honda. You also get a wireless charger on each of these cars. It works medium well, and it heats up your phone a little bit, and you can't get ambient light really in either of these cars. There's a little bit of like kind of zone lighting, but not like LED 64 color stuff like maybe you'd see in a Hyundai. So overall, from a tech perspective, these are actually pretty similar, although I wouldn't say they're similar at the sharp end of the segment. You can get more stuff in a Toyota, Kia, and a Hyundai. And the last thing that we're going to talk about today is probably the most important thing to a lot of you in this class shopping, and it's price. Now, starting out base for base, the Mazda is going to be about $700 more expensive than the Honda. But the caveat with that, though, is the Mazda is going to come standard with all-wheel drive, where you're just going to have front-wheel drive in the Honda. If you want all-wheel drive and you want the top spec of each of these cars, then the Honda ends up being a little bit more expensive, about $800 more expensive. So I shouldn't say a little bit, but it's not like it's thousands of dollars more. So at the end of the day, these things are actually priced pretty similarly. Now, we went through a lot of categories today, and to be honest, the Honda won most of them. But one of the big ones that it didn't win was the fuel efficiency challenge. This is significantly more expensive or more efficient than the Honda, at least in January, early February, in colder weather. Again, we'll keep track of how this performs more in the summer months where it's warmer and maybe the electrical motors and battery component work a little bit more efficiently. As we know from our time with EVs, the cold really sucks the efficiency out of electrical systems. So with this hybrid system being the way that it is, maybe it's more susceptible to temperature volatility. I actually think, having spent some significant time with each of these things, that I might take home the Honda. Well, obviously I have taken home the Honda, at least for my wife. So I guess at the end of this video, I feel that I made the right choice. Now, the thing that I'm gonna say now is you're not making the wrong choice with either of these. I think that these two represent the best hybrids in the segment as it stands. The RAV4 is too old. It's on the eve of a refresh, so we'll see what happens with that when it gets redone and debuted later this year. The Forester is new for this past year, but it doesn't have a hybrid. The hybrid is coming next year or later this year, but until then, it's not competitive on the hybrid front. And then you've got things like the Tucson and the Sportage, but I haven't spent enough time with either of those to truly kind of rank them within this class. So I think for me right now, this is the top and this is number 2. So either way you shake it, you're gonna have a great car. It's just, if it's me and my money and the things that I look for, I might take this, although I will miss the efficiency of the CX50. But with that, thank you to Mazda for letting us have a go in your new CX50 hybrid. It's very good. And thank you to you for watching, and thank you to my wife for letting me borrow her car, or I guess our car, to shoot this video. So leave it down in the comments which one you'd have, and we'll see you in the next one.